I think we can start with the first film excerpt.
So, we're continuing to look at entrainment this week. We use the patch all the time. In fact, we're so familiar with it, we probably think we don't need to study it. Lena! No blips during class. Sorry, but I have to. Fine. It's your tuition money. Which reminds me, tuition repayment work from 4 to 7 p.m. today. We're working on a new project for Gelatin Unlimited. I brought in something to show you.
Sorry, Gibson. I just got a message from my job. I have 10 minutes to respond. Do you mind?
Go ahead. I'm going to show you a video.
Is this one of those cheesy early patch programs?
No, it's from before the two-way models. It's called the Common Sense. In fact, your parents might have told you about it.
All through human history, we have wanted to connect. In the beginning, there was the patch one way. The one way is about experiencing someone else's emotions in real time. When someone else's feelings change how you feel, it can change your world. With the two-way, we've found a way to take it to a whole new level. Your brainwaves will send at the same time as you receive. With the two-way, we can act and create together. We don't know where this will lead. It's a new design for the human being, and it's for you to find out.
I have been waiting for this day for 3 years. I would like to present to you the two-way. The first two-way entrainment device where users send their experience and receive at the same time. We have overcome incredible obstacles, hardware and software design to bring this product to the market today. This device is going to blow your mind.
Well, the difficulty is that 70% of people have been left out of the production of goods and services in the economy, and only 20% of those people have been able to find work through the patch.
Okay, let me walk you through your contract. Signing this, you agree that the device will be left as inserted for the fixed term of 9 months. Transmissions from your womb to third parties will be the private information of Juvie. Any medical, emotional, or employment-related events that may occur. Please move mat A to area marked D. Insertion. You will feel a slight pinch. It should only hurt for a few seconds.
most of you will already know, Bridge is releasing a two-way neural entrainment device. Now, what will this mean for our strategy? And how can we rework our operations to maintain security for our clients? Things will change quickly. I want ideas.
What are you excited about? The two-way. Jules says they're going to use it to monitor our customer service.
What?
I know.
You're kidding.
No, I'm serious. It's totally ridiculous. It's incredible, man. I was so excited too for it, but...
So, what do you think so far?
They're using visual techniques to represent using the patch, which is completely wrong.
I know. For us, it's completely ridiculous today.
Well, it's quaint.
But back then, they were very visual. I mean, think about what a shock it would have been for all of human history. Sensations inside people were experienced by that person alone. And then when they were shared, it would be verbally or with images. That's how it was.
So why is Liz so happy when the patch arrives?
She needs a new patch.
A lot of people believed it could bring about a collective political movement.
What? From sharing feelings?
Well, of course, the patch did make life a lot more collective, but just not in the way they expected. The belief that being connected would mean that people would join together to fight for a better collective situation was false.
What about cluster relationships?
Well, of course, relationships did change. There are a lot more group relationships and group identities.
May I be excused? I have an 11 o'clock.
Go ahead. But we want you here on the remote, Lena. And don't forget repayment work.
Okay.
Max, your thoughts?
I say more sharing's always good. What are we so worried about? We all know it's the age of the post-individual. Our employees might not always like it, but it's good for the economy. We just need to tailor our transmissions to the specific needs of the clients.
True, my man. Good point. Good point. Any other thoughts? Ladies?
This will definitely open excellent employee monitoring opportunities. The raw experience data we'll receive will help us build actionable interaction models between employees and between workers and managers. If we move fast enough, we can patent and license them.
Okay. Lance.
Melanie, this science fiction drama of yours is all about the future, but it starts with a kind of plunge into the past. Mm-hmm. There's the students who are receiving lessons in entrainment, which is somehow learning how to manage and be managed by an affective technology that allows them to both send and receive emotions to each other. And then they're shown a film, and in the film, we see the past of this technology and a moment where we see that moment when it switched from being one-way to two-way. And there's something curious about the way it begins, because then throughout the film, at least for me, throughout the work, I feel a little uncertain about whether I'm in the future past. I feel all the more uncertain because this switch from one to two-way technologies kind of parallels the big shift in media history from broadcast media to network media. And yet it's clearly not about that. It's clearly about something it's a world that's very, very specific and rich in its own right. And I think it would be great if you tell us a little bit more about this world, how it's constructed, and some of the implications that the patch has when it becomes fully what it seems to have been destined to be, that is to say, a two-way device, which does quite the opposite of most devices, which releases a new form of feeling.
Yeah, well, so like you say, it's technology that it kind of allows access of one person to another person's embodied experiences. Their physical sort of sensations, but also their affective sort of registers as well. And it, obviously, there are various parallels in the different forms of technological sharing we're kind of having emerging at this point in time. But at the same time, that technology and its kind of imagining is kind of asking questions that go, I think, beyond that. And at the root of the work, there's a question of the possibilities for collectivity. The patch itself kind of releases this incredible sort of potential just in terms of, just undoing individual subjecthood. You would not have your contained experience anymore. Imagining if the patch was used in its kind of fullest form or something like this. You would have much fewer distinctions, perhaps, or new distinctions. But what I found really interesting, like this kind of science fiction evolved over time with me as I was working on it. I kind of first thought of its kind of potentials of this technology, and then also part of the exercise was to start to insert the patch into reality, into the world we have now, and into a world of kind of economic imperatives, I suppose, is one of the strongest felt things about the common sense. It's like the intersection of this technology that opens up, like I say, this incredible potential, but also how it's used. How it's used for different sort of purposes and interests and these sorts of things, and practically speaking, what it becomes. And so it's very much about change in a technology over time. So the release of a technology and then how it transforms. So going back to your question, that's why I've structured this work in terms of a class that's happening 10 years after this release that we're seeing here, this moment of release where there's a two-way model, like you're saying, a model where the network form is kind of something like the network form, not the network form, but like this kind of reciprocal form of the patch rather than like a kind of more one-way voyeuristic. So anyway, so that sets up a political question, I suppose, for the patch. Like it's suddenly offering this new, more open-ended form where any sort of back and forth sort of input can be happening. So, potential, and then at the same time, how does it then get used? Why are certain avenues closed off? And that's the open question in the kind of first parts of the work.
It's fascinating that with such a seemingly revolutionary potential, and which really, evokes the promises of a community fully present to itself as a unified multiplicity. This is really a grand utopia that you are going to focus really on the immense new realms of kind of social hierarchy and above all exploitation that are opened up by that. And there's many hints of that immediately in the movie that we're seeing, in the common sense, in this testimony from the past. But what's in the present of your science fiction drama, it's present, it's the future for us, is in fact a classroom. And this I find really subtle in your in this phase of your work, that you come into a very common form of social relation, a training about entrainment. And in this training session, or in this class, which is like a university class, how to succeed in the economy, is full of all these, well, the people are using the patch while they're being trained about the patch, and at the same time, it's not just a training, it's not just an indoctrination, there's some free play in there as well. So that's another aspect of the way that you've constructed this whole thing.
Yeah, I see the classroom as kind of being, I suppose, for the purposes of the story, a kind of element of unpacking what this technology is, but at the same time, I also imagine it as a very kind of useful sort of point of a dovetailing of both the sort of some of the changes that are happening in our kind of post-crisis moment, and then at the same time, like you say, like a kind of reflection on what the patch is. A class where students are being asked to think about something that's become so much a kind of mundanity within their everyday life that they aren't even able to think about it anymore. For me, participating in the evening events and then watching this opening again, I was just thinking a lot about what is actually being delivered with the patch, what's its kind of truth, what's its verifiability, and it goes back to the last speakers and their discussion. It just insofar as, yes, on the one hand there's this amazing potential with the patch, but also it rests on the biophysical. It rests on this verifiable sort of type of bodily evidence that is increasingly becoming more and more the one that is kind of resorted to above all others for the same reasons that the panelists were discussing. That, actually in a kind of uncanny way, I was thinking about the discussion of language that was being had in the previous discussion, and how it's kind of, in relation to the lie detector, in relationship to the different technologies that have been discussed, that language comes into question, but like the body's evidence, its heartbeats, its chemical changes or whatever, those become the proof. And in a similar sort of way, though obviously the patch is not about proof specifically, or not, the work doesn't discuss that, it's very interesting that almost, and I've been asked this a lot, like what happens to language in the world where everyone's using a patch all the time? And that's a very good question. The other part that's kind of implied in your question is, why is everyone using the patch all the time? Is it just a really fun technology? Well, no, and early on I introduced this idea of exigency and the patch, of like, how the patch actually becomes instrumental, or it becomes useful in various ways in terms of business and management cultures, in terms of managing labor. And so from the very beginning, like you say, in the classroom, we're seeing that new forms of kind of like, I suppose, labor time management are suddenly possible, where like different sort of parallel processings are happening, where these young people are expected to attend a class, and at the same time, they're doing different forms of work. It comes about in later scenes that they're not just leaving to go to work, some of them are actually working while they're in the class. And so, yeah, it has both science fiction, it has both kind of elements that I would say propel you into an imagined future, and other ones that keep pulling you into a kind of present bind, I suppose, present sort of conditions.
That's right, yeah. It strikes me that if there's a question of truth in the work, it's about the truth of a kind of immediate performativity, and that comes out in a really shocking way that must have everyone wondering what's this part about. the transmission of the pure vitality, the pure tranquility, the sort of emergence of life of a baby in the womb becomes apparently, although we're not quite sure what this means, a resource for someone whose job it is to exercise a psychic and economic violence on others, because the manager woman who must manage more unless she'll be fired is somehow receiving this transmission from the baby.
Yeah.
That might be worth explaining even.
It's one of the subplots within the story. There is, on the one hand, a woman who we see at the very beginning who goes into this mini operation sort of situation, unmanned by any people, all automated, in which she is actually having a patch kind of like put into her womb so that there'd be transmissions from her womb. And then the person who's receiving this transmission is another person who can actually use the experience of a baby in the womb as a kind of, for lack of a better way of explaining it, like a relaxation sort of technique. And that story kind of continues throughout the work. And there are different moments in the common sense where we see different forms of precariousness, different forms of economic vulnerability, and how they get borne out through this technology. So in a way, I guess I could say that the story has different parallel objects in a way. It's both a comment on technologies and how they change, and how they change in a kind of dialogue with other sorts of phenomena which are economic and which are obviously social and political as well. That's a major sort of trajectory in the work, is to kind of keep weaving in and out of one phenomena to the other, and how they kind of interrelate.
Well, we students have a lot to learn about the patch. Not only because it does so many things, but also because it itself changes in the course of the work. It changes due to people's interventions. Do you think we should look at the next part?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's have the next one.
I figured out what you're trying to do. You want to make an exchange instrument from the patch.
Excellent detective work. Nothing ever mobilized desire for people better than money. It's all desires and wants focused onto one instrument. And I realized the patch plus money is the ultimate tie-in.
The activation of a need immediately activates the currency. Cut out the middleman of money.
Exactly. But it would still correlate with the work they do and the market. But you ask the people to adapt to them that much more closely.
But what I still don't understand is, why pick me for this job?
I want you to unlock the ways that patch behaviors can cause maximal neuroplastic change. We are in the business of tailoring people to fit the client's needs, after all.
You want to make an exchange instrument that turns people into more lucrative subjects?
Exchange is connection with others. Adapting to others. It's receptivity. Oh, no. I see what you're thinking. You're thinking, oh no, not with my pure discovery. Well, honestly, wake up. Getting to wanting and needing at a deeper level, that's the key. We could make a fortune.
We?
You will come with me.
I don't think so.
Really? You won't? Well, I think that's all for today.
So, we're here talking about the technosphere during this week. I recently read a thing by some internet guru named Bruce Schneier, and he talks about what he calls the world-sized web. He says that the so-called Internet of Things is a vast assemblage of sensors and of actuators. Or in other words, there's sort of 1 million devices to capture information and 1 million machines that can act on that information. He thinks we're headed towards a world-sized robot. But I actually think your portrayal is much more convincing than that, because you show us a world which is mediated by machines, but the mediation of the machines does not create a gigantic robot. It creates an incredibly supple affective mesh where everyone is regulating everyone else, but according to parameters that some of which are strategic. And here we see this extraordinary sort of Faustian moment where the entrepreneur wants to create parameters that will reach so deeply inside of us that we will become entirely the economy. We will become a much more, or rather our emotions will become the driving force of an economy so close to us that we are the money, almost. We no longer need the medium of exchange. Ourselves, our relations are the exchange, if I've understood. So I mean, this can tell us something about the reality of the technosphere, as well as it can tell us something about the sort of potential of your imagination in this piece.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's strange that actually there have been similar sorts of things. This kind of this coming together of, or this kind of almost like loosening of money from its physical bonds within the kind of world of Silicon Valley for the last while, for a long while, but also they're continuing apace. Yes, I mean, you brought up a really important point, which is that for me, when I made the common sense, when I started on this project, it was with the aim of trying to discuss topics I had discussed before, which is, I suppose, the economy within capitalism and I suppose, being able to talk about structural and systemic sort of conditions of that. But in the past, when I've made fictions that deal with it, like a work I've made called Popular Unrest, they actually try to kind of give body to capitalism, this kind of this thing that can't really be represented very easily or at all. And so when I tried to do that earlier, but with the common sense, I actually wanted to, like you say, talk about how economy actually really works, not capitalism as an object, because it's not an object in any way, and it can't be represented. Like as a network that's very much within our behaviors, within our kind of, obviously in all the ways that people discuss, within our desires, within but like also importantly, kind of intercommunication, interrelation, having so much to do with it, and very much in our kind of interdependencies. And that's actually quite a hard thing to get to grips with and to represent. So that's why I've ended up making a story that's very, multiple in its kind of like story trajectories. The scene we just watched was actually the last scene in one of 2 bifurcating storylines. After a certain point in the story actually splits into 2. The whole story, which is an hour and a half long, of the common sense. And if anything, it's going for non-linear sorts of storylines because it's trying to take on this kind of this discontinuous and networked and sort of like, very much sort of like dispersed forms of power that are being actually brought to bear in different relations at different times. So the person who actually has power in one situation might not throughout the film, might actually be having various sorts of economic imperatives being foisted on them at another point or something like this.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting because there's so many they're not really subplots, they're just a multiplicity of strivings that are represented in the film, some of which are people coming from positions of very little power, many of which are people in conditions where their social status is eroding, a very familiar feeling these days. And then there are also other ones where we see what can really only be called managerial power. This is something quite interesting because in that conception of capital as a kind of structural force, particularly when one focuses on money capital, on the mathematization of monetary flows and stuff, exactly what disappears is that very, very human relation, which is a devious one, and which is one where the will of some person is expressed either directly or through the creation of a construct, of some sort of intervention that may even be a hidden one, so as to extract something from another. And that's a massive reality of our societies. It's called, by a very simple word, management. So management has a big role in in this work, actually.
Yeah, it does. It does. But at the same time, there are kind of more managerial characters. There are other characters that are kind of doing moments of management, but mixed with other moments of almost like trying to look out for someone. There are various ways in which the kind of management form has been internalized, and also kind of like is running parallel to some other relationship that's between the two people, and like. Again, these are things that we already live with all the time, and it was really trying to give them a form in a story that could actually be reflected on. And what I find with the common sense is that when you start to make a story that way, you also end up with lots of unanswered questions, lots of open questions that you aren't going to be able to shut in the course of the story. And so I had to just kind of like accept that and allow that in a way that I hadn't before, which has really influenced the structure of the work. I don't think I explained this at the beginning, so I should explain that the first section that we saw with the classroom almost like begins as the kind of like base of the story. It's a kind of first 5 episodes that I guess would be, if the story were a tree, it would be like the trunk or something like this. And then the story branches off into 2 directions, like I mentioned. But the reason it does that is because the technology breaks down. After those first 5 episodes, the technology breaks down and the story then kind of breaks into 2. One that has a kind of world where people wake up and go, without this technology, we actually can suddenly see certain things much clearer. We don't have these relations that have been kind of defining us in the same way, and people start to ask questions, protests begin, movements begin, but also die down. And then on the other hand, the story kind of continues as it was. The patch breaks down, but then everything's the same as it was. The world continues using the patch the way it was. And in a way, this was kind of like a form that wanted to reflect on technological sort of change at this point in our history, I suppose. Like just technological possibilities and yeah, the kind of like indeterminacy of them. I suppose on some level, I wanted to give that a really, really rooted structure in the formation of the work.
Yeah, maybe that says something about the fragility of our times when we are kind of quite aware that certain systems might not last, even the ones that have come in massively and so rapidly. There is definitely in the affective range of this piece, there's definitely a presence of anxiety. that corresponds. Also a lot to the things we're talking about here, the Anthropocene, the reality of, the dawning reality of climate change, of the unintended consequences of a couple of centuries of industrial capitalism. And that's very much felt in a kind of, there's a kind of quivering of uncertainty about one's personal future in the very short term that comes up continually in the film, and then it's overshadowed, it accumulates, it gathers together into a kind of larger question about where we're going socially.
Yes, yeah, I mean, just, it seems, it's a world that gets defined by certain things that are recognizable from the present, just in terms of a lot of the types of work that we're seeing in the work, in the common sense. A lot of the different types of labor are actually made sort of vulnerable and are defended through actual social processes of like trying to, I suppose, maintain your connections, maintain certain relationships. And that was a decision I made to only talk about that particular sort of realm of sort of precariousness that actually at the moment is kind of besetting the middle classes in the developed world often enough, not always, but you know, like, so in a way it's very much a kind of like, it's a story that's very much defined by certain relations between individuals, which kind of like, it kind of focuses on one set of realities. And there are, you know, to me, the kind of questions that you bring up about the Anthropocene are, in a way, are just like, they have a totally other sort of reality, like this, not the inward looking at other people right. To try to secure your scant sort of, you know, abilities to sustain yourself. That's the kind of attention that will eventually have to be able to open up somehow. But it's, you know, it's an open question of like, what are the conflicts that are going to arise between, like, on the one hand, like trying to defend your survival within capitalism, and then this other much huger question about trying to defend another sort of planetary type of survival, or whatever you'd describe that as.
Well, to look more closely at the kind of anxiety that you're talking about in the film, we should probably look at the third piece now. And
yes.
And so let's.
Yeah. I should just say, like the earlier part, this is like two different clips from within a later section of the video.
Okay.
Thanks.
I sent you a message.
When?
10 minutes ago. Did you not get it?
Oh,
I expect a timely response from you. Wait a minute. I'm sending to you now. You're not picking up.
I just leave my patch off until I start.
I'll translate for you then. What I was transmitting is this is totally unacceptable. I shouldn't have to explain this.
There is no rule that I have to wear it before I get in, sir.
It is expected. There are 40 other employees here sensing right now. How can you possibly do a better job than they?
I can still do a good job.
We've gone over this. You do a better job than your neighbor, or you have no job. I didn't want to have to do this. Put in your patch, please.
What's that noise? What's that noise?
Sorry, it's my alarm.
Can't you keep it on internal?
They wake up to a murky, dark morning. everything is rainy and aged. They wake aware of a new care, a new idea that hadn't been with them before. In the cracks of their psyche, in the places where they had previously dreamt and lain.
Romy wakes up annoyed. She washes her face in the sink and brushes her teeth. She arrives at her work. Nearby, she hears a disturbance.
The patch has turned back on.
Romy runs to the kitchen to put in her patch, worried she will be caught without it. She has a sudden pain in her shoulder.
When the patch turned back on, the connections were all mixed up. A new sensation. No connections you were forced into. No self-selecting relations from your social set.
Romy is serving a sandwich to a customer, but she is sweating heavily. Suddenly she begins to retch. She is getting transmissions from another person who is sick. Romy gets a message telling her she's fired. On her way out of work, she takes the opportunity to tell her supervisor exactly what she thinks.
Due to patch-related revenue loss, all studies have been finance adjusted in accordance with default max capital reliance codes. For more information, see our easy-to-read FAQs. Non-payment of forward tuition costs will result in immediate profile penalties. New knowledge. Invest in yourself.
The university is recalling all of its university loans. Everywhere, students panic.
We signed an agreement.
Please refer to your user agreement to see that we revoke work-to-learn loans when it is no longer feasible within our profit scaling. Swift Actuator's profit ratios may impact your learning securities at any time. Get up-to-the-minute reports at Swift Actuator.
I'd like to speak to the manager.
You know, there's a lot that's mysterious in this piece. There's a lot of exploratory, gestures in it, but it also creates at times the uncanny feeling that you're speaking the truth about society today. And this is, you're speaking it outright, we were both, I think, quite surprised to hear that the South African students apparently are in exactly the situation that's portrayed here in the science fiction film, You convey this world in which the power is not an abstract thing, but which is an intimate presence that bears upon the person. But at the same time, another part of the truth that you speak is that in the course of both branches, actually, of the science fiction, the students, the teachers evolve in the sense that they begin to search around, to explore within this mysterious and confusing world that is their world, possibilities to do something different. And I'm really struck by that because I do move through cultural and educational institutions, and I see that the people who work in these institutions, given what's happened in our society now, one can see the veneer sort of cracking, the self-censorship lifting, and there's a tendency to start talking about issues in classes that are not distant and abstract, that are very, very close, that are the issues that actually matter to the people and no longer the fiction that all of this is going just fine. And I think you portray that in a way in the film that's really very, very convincing.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, this kind of cracking and this change that happens at first underground and then later in the story becomes kind of, I suppose, protests and social movements, and the kind of almost the materials I use are both actual kind of footage from protests that were happening during protests like Occupy Wall Street and things like that, and then also things that I shot myself with actors. And so it was generally a kind of comment on a change that was happening post-crisis from around 2011 onwards. I started this work around 2011, I should say. And, there's a lot, I suppose there are a lot of parallel things that this story is trying to do at the same time. I suppose it's trying to discuss this moment of our neoliberal form of capitalism, the economy we live in, and its kind of potential sort of dead ends and problems that people keep getting kind of mired in. Those things, and then at the same time, it tries to actually kind of like almost deal with kind of problems of collectivity that are perhaps more philosophical or just like more sort of like, just contemplative in their problems. And so watching the opening section that I showed where the boss has said, why are you not using your patch yet? You have to have it on before you get to work. And then there's this moment towards the end of that scene where we just see this kind of punishment doled out that's really just like the boss's sort of feedback. That to me has always been both very important and also kind of on some level like ludicrous in its kind of like sudden confrontation of what the patch is and what has been being kind of like proposed within it, like that there's something about subjective interrelations that entail the affective and these things that could actually be so bad that they would be a punishment. Like that on some level seems kind of like kind of funny in a way, or like maybe it wouldn't have to be so bad. But it's really interesting because of the historical story, because of the kind of vulnerability that this character would be feeling at that moment in her job, like that there is a moment when your dependence on a particular boss or a particular sort of set of circumstances will actually define whether you're going to be able to pay the next bill, able to, get food at home, and these sorts of things, which, like, increasingly, it's felt differently in different countries, different societies, but like a lot of higher income countries, or historically in the last century, higher income countries have like really gone through very quick transitions in terms of the amount of unemployment, the amount of underemployment, the amount of just poverty of various kinds. And so that's a definite context for everything that happens within the story.
Yeah, there's a point at the very start we heard when someone says the problem is that the patch didn't new jobs using the patch didn't replace all the jobs that were cut out by it, and the jobs are apparently cut out because you can manage so well with the patch by just using the emotional power either to reward or to punish. You can apparently manage people really well, right? Well, this speaks so closely to the present. I was just at an art school in a very well-off place. As I was telling you. I've got my head full of Melanie's science fiction drama. I go to this art school. It turns out it's being explained to me as I go up the stairs that this school is entirely, every wall has a window of it. Many walls are made of glass. All the rooms are flexible and open to every use. You have to program. You have to request the room each time. The students have to look up on their phones to find out where their actual class is. The students, it turns out, have just 80% have just signed a letter completely disavowing the administration, which which they can't bear anymore. The professors are trying to find ways to join in this. Meanwhile, there's what's happening is really, it's what's happening is every day, and what's happening also has the same quality of fiction that's in your film. One doesn't know whether to take this seriously or, wait a minute, I'm in Switzerland, So there's something.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's really interesting how in these kind of moments of flexibilization that tout themselves as actual like total luxury of like being able to work anywhere in the building or something like this is actually like even cost cutting in situations like the ones you're describing, where it's not so much there's probably a necessity of cost cutting, but it's one that becomes structural, that has to do with actually the fact that all costs, like all kind of peripheral costs, are being cut in educational institutions, that that when they aren't the kind of core things to do with like marketing the school or kind of getting new people paying tuitions or whatever it might be in whatever different country. So like certain things are being seen as expendable a lot more at this moment.
I forgot to say that the person who invited me had just been demoted, but was actually glad of it because he would escape part of the pressure of this place.
Oh, yeah.
Should we open it up now, do you think?